You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارشتايجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
All the fun stuff's happening in Montreal this summer, Kevin. You got Drogba, obviously. You got Roma coming, I guess, if you like that sort of thing. And Real Madrid's in town.
Yeah, but no Ronaldo, no Pepe, no players are in the Euro. But still, the excitement of Real Madrid and Zidane training with his team at the Centre Nutrile was quite palpable yesterday.
I imagine. No Pepe. I imagine that's why there was no police warning that went out during the day.
To be quite fair, if you looked at how when they arrived Sunday to their hotel and all that, like a lot of people tried to mob them, and some of them were aggressively met by security. And let's just say, I have seen tackles, like great tackles off the pitch as well yesterday and Sunday.
I wrote an article back in the Glory Days, 24th minute, during the Real Madrid friendly when they came to Toronto, and I didn't have tickets for it. It was literally at that time, it was the first home game since the first season that I had missed. I'd missed a couple in 2007 because it wasn't quite as ingrained yet. But from the end of 2007 through to that Real Madrid in 2010, I'd been to every home game and several away games as well. So at any rate, I didn't go to that game because the ticket prices and all the sort of controversy around that, and a lot of Toronto fans were cheesed off about it. But at any rate, I went down to the open practice the day before the game and just watched the crowd reaction and just all these people that I'd never seen before around a TFC game, obviously, right? That were just, every time there was a hint that the Real Madrid was going to leave the stadium, there would be this massive mob of people that would run one way to try and catch them over there. And then, of course, it never materialized. Then it would run the other way. There's probably 1,000 people or so outside the stadium. Mostly young, mostly of Latin descent, I'd say. And finally, this garage door opens up from inside the stadium. It's normally where the beer is delivered, basically. And out drives very slowly this completely tinted windowed bus that you can't see a damn thing through. And they're, without stopping, just straight through the crowd and into the sunset. And I always thought that was a little bit like, oh, come on, guys. You could have given them a little damn wave. They've been standing there for an hour.
Yeah, no, but I understand why now. Like, literally, this team gets mobbed everywhere it goes. The level of scrutiny that this team literally attracts from its supporters, its fans across the world, it's kind of mind-boggling, because we here in our world in MLS, in the bubble, we talk about like our situation covering team. Just seeing Pirlo leaving the stadium and fans waiting for him with Juve fans, people like you mentioned that we never see usually in our day-to-day operations showing up, and we're still like, all right, so we in the bubble, like, okay, MLS is pretty good, but there's clearly still a divide, Duane.
Yeah, no, even I can remember being down front for the open practice again for the Manchester City game, and those players just get off the bus, their headphones are on, they're used to having mobs around them, they understand probably deep down that these people have been waiting to see them, but at the same time, it's exhausting for them, probably.
If you stop for one, you have to stop for 2,000. That's a big difference, too, because otherwise you'll be like a jerk. So if you're going to be seen like a jerk, might as well not give one, so that way it'll be equal across the board. And if you look at Pirlo, he wanted to do a lot of signing and selfies. Now it's getting quite a exhausted process now. When you get like a player, he signs the autograph, then takes a phone, takes a selfie. It's about 15, 20 seconds per person. So if you do it for everybody, you're going to be there for hours.
Yeah, I like the tennis players when they go off the court, they always sign a few autographs right by the entranceway, but I think that's kind of how they control it, because they just do it when they're leaving the court and they don't do it outside of that. So maybe there's ways. And in fairness, I've seen pretty high-end players before stop and do quite a bit of autograph signing. They're not, all bad, but when they're coming into a game or whatever, or coming out of a game, it sometimes can seem a little disheartening if you're a fan of a young kid or whatever. I imagine it's pretty disappointing. It's unfortunate, but it's the way of the world, Kevin.
Exactly, but it's 2 summer in a row now. Last year was the summer of Marino and Chelsea, and unfortunately, it didn't pan out to be quite memorable for this club. We'll see if Real Madrid changes the tradition where they come and train in Montreal and actually have a good beginning of the season, which wasn't the case for Chelsea. So at least it's and for infrastructures, the way we talk about a lot on this show, guess what? 2 of the biggest clubs in the world, if not 2 of the top 5 biggest clubs in the world, used the Impact's facilities over the last 2 years, and they were not even finished. Now they are almost very close to it, and it's exactly what we talked about. So facilities that are good for Real Madrid and good for Chelsea are probably great and the best for development, for the pyramid, for the young kids from the U8 and moving up. So it's interesting for me and it's quite an accomplishment by the Impact. We have to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, I have to go see them one day. I've obviously been to the Kia training grounds here in Toronto several times. I've been inside it even. And I know that that's one of the reasons Rumours came here, for instance. A lot of players will talk about that. And it is a beautiful facility up there. I mean, several fields, they pretty much, they almost shoot you if you step on the grass. Like, don't step on the grass, basically. Like, there's the field that the first team trains on is guarded. It is literally guarded, right? So that's how much the pitch is probably better than it is at BMO.
And there's the kitchen facilities, the rooms facilities, the rehabilitation facilities with state-of-the-art technology for injuries, recuperation, rehab, and all those things under the same roof with there's one concept I'd really like in this way, where their first team trains, their locker room, they have their private locker room, but every other locker room of the academy inside this training facilities has a number of steps to the first team locker room, just to remind you that you're just a few steps away. If you do everything correctly, you might eventually end up over there.
Fair enough. Yeah, they don't do anything like that at Kia, but certainly, and again, they do have the only area I haven't seen at the Kia training grounds at this point, because I get pretty good access to it when I'm covering League One up there, is the first team area, because the first team area requires a separate bit of keys. But that said, you see, I've seen Javinko wandering around up there. I've seen several of the first team players just in and about and mingling with the young kids. Guys like Danny Dicchio are you trip over them, right? It gets to the point you don't even notice them anymore, right?
Well, you are under the same roof, literally. Yeah. So that has a meaning, and just if it's just philosophically, it's really good for the players to know that, look, you never know what can happen. You can bump into Drogba, and he can teach you something that leads you to become better. So you never know what can happen.
Yeah, and look, last thought on this, but it certainly matters that these type of little things, and it's how teams that have a little bit more money to spend in Major League Soccer can do things that sets them apart from other clubs that are out there. I still think we're in the era, and we've talked about this many times before, we're still kind of in the era where it's really equal. But I think as the influence of the homegrowns, the influence of the academies become greater and greater, that those clubs that spend the money and invest in the second team and invest in the academy structure and the facilities around that, it only stands to reason that most of them, not all of them, because things can go wrong and you can have inconfidence here and there. Toronto's first 10 years are an ample example of that. Can hold that back. But generally speaking, the money is going to start to very slowly rise to the top, I think, in Major League Soccer, just as it has everywhere else in the world. And these facilities are one of the examples of that. But let's move on. And they're not doing anything other than practicing, right? In Montreal, just a couple training sessions type thing.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's their base camp. So that's where they will do their most training session, but they're playing somewhere else. So they're using Montreal like their home for their trip International Champions Cup this summer.
Yeah, it's probably cheaper for them too, because the Canadian dollar. I mean, not that Real Madrid has to worry about.
Yeah, but they reserve 2 floors, I think, of the Ritz-Carlton. So as much as it's cheaper, maybe the Canadian dollar, and the amount of expenses they're doing at just that hotel, it's just denies the purpose, anyways.
All right, there you go.
Talking about $100,000 a night for maybe or something like that. So yeah, it's just not a cheap trip.
It's Real Madrid money, man. It's a different kind of concept. They have a different view of the world than the rest of us,
kind of money too. It's like, the money comes in, funnels in from everywhere in the world, gathers into Santiago Bernabeu. So yeah, it's a lot of money.
All right. A couple, I wanted to move and talk about some Major League Soccer issues today, particularly as it relates to managers. Now, I'm in a market that has the second most managers all time. If you look at all of Major League Soccer's clubs over all of the history.
Since 96, yes, since 1996.
Since 1996, the team with the second most managers ever is Toronto FC. Let that sink in for a second. They didn't come into the league to 2007. They're already second. First is New York, by the way, the Red Bulls, obviously.
11 years late to the party, but they're like, you know what? We're going to catch up.
We're going to break a record. And because Toronto is a market, at least in the soccer side of things, which is very knee-jerk in its reactions to bad losses. And certainly this past weekend, we talked about it a lot yesterday, so we're not going to belabor it today or not even really mention it today beyond this. But the loss on Saturday has caught all of the Vanney out people have come out of the woodwork and are screaming for this man's head. Now, my position on this is well established. I think it would be lunacy. I'll say that again, lunacy to get rid of him. What's the definition of insanity? Is to repeat the same behavior and expect different results. That's exactly what they'd be doing if they fired Vanney right now. However, I did nonetheless put a poll out yesterday. So this is the Soccer Today question of the day was simply this. It was Vanney in or Vanney out. And I used the hashtag, so it was kind of cute. I was being very modern.
You're being very, very contemporary.
Yes, Vanney in, Vanney out. And I explained within the question that if you did not respond to it, like sometimes people like to nitpick when I do a yes/no question, and you know who you are if you do that. But anyway, so it was like, don't tell me we need more time before you can answer that, because if that is in fact your answer, we need more time. You've answered it. It's Vanney in, right? It's either right now, right here, or do you want him in or do you want him out? And if you think that you need more time to decide that decision, you want them in because you want more time. At any rate, the results with 151 votes, which is actually a fairly significant vote total for a poll that I put out. It's usually around 75 or so, 60-40 for in. So that there is a significant loud minority that want his head on a platter right now, Kevin. And I made my position clear on that. You were a proponent to make the change in Montreal last year, and there comes times, obviously, when you do need to make a change. But what is your mind? When is a good time? When do you know, and how do you know when it's time to make a move away from a manager?
Well, to answer this really easily, when you know, you know. You don't even ask your question if you know or not. Okay, and when it's more than one red flag that make you question the benefit of going on the same path, if you don't see things change enough, you don't see the progress, the growth, the cohesion, chemistry, a project that everybody pulls in the same direction. If you don't have that, you're not going forward. And if you're not going forward in today's sports landscape, you're going backward if you're not going forward. That's how life works. That's how the stock market works. That's how we overanalyze everything in our society, sports included. If you're not making gains, if your stock is not rising, well, guess what? It's going down. So that's how I look at it. And if you're looking at Toronto, there are some growing pains. And I have other example in this league, in this very season, that would probably calm people in Toronto that maybe they should continue the course for now, because first of all, there's no excuses in sports, we say, but half the roster's injured in Toronto, basically. So you kind of have to give a little bit of loose to that noose for Vanney. But if you're looking at New York City FC, Duane is my example this year. Patrick Vieira is able to do something that we're not expecting at all, is to getting results out of this team that, yes, had good components here and there, very top-heavy, big gap between the best and the average player of the team. But if you're looking at what he's able to do, especially when he plays outside of his lunchbox pitch, he's able to use width to manage and to tactically influence this team. And it's been impressive, and they've climbed up the rankings. And guess what? After 5 weeks this season, we wondered if Vieira was at the right spot at the right time. So you never know what can happen in Major League Soccer. Few injuries, you go back, you're struggling. Guess what? Toronto's still above that red line. Yes, not too far from the actual cutoff line, but it's still very close. There's only a gap of 7 points before the top two teams and the rest. It's not a panic button situation. And you have to, for me right now, continue the course, because you have outside influence, injuries, and basically just injuries right now for Toronto that are dictating who plays and not. And when that happens, what do you want a manager to do? Like, he cannot, the manager doesn't have a decision if the player gets injured or not. So that's where I look at it for Toronto right now.
Yeah, I believe there is the cult of the manager is a real thing that exists in the world of football, right? We see it especially in Europe. You look at the battles in England right now. We're going to talk a bit about that later on in this show. The sort of like the emergence of the bully strikes back from the Revenge of the Nerds last year, right in the Premier League.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, so they're spending money, and they're spending a lot of money in the managers. You have, three of the biggest clubs have brought in new guys, and that's a lot of people's focused on the new guys coming in. So there is a cult of the manager out there. But I struggle with it. The manager has some influence, obviously, particularly when it comes to player recruitment. But I wonder truly inside my head how much, and this is the issue that a lot of people have with Vanny, is they don't think he manages games well. I just don't know how much influence he can have on a game. I really don't see it the same way as other people when it comes to that. I mean, yeah,
you got 3 substitutions, Duane, and you can yell from the sideline. That's basically all that you can do. And if the player decides not to listen to you when he's playing, what can you do outside of subbing him off? And if you've already done your substitution, guess what? You're stuck with him on the bench. So what do you want him to do?
Yeah, well, that's why I tweeted out yesterday. If Vanny yelled more, do you think people would like him more? And I think that's actually, I'm answering that's a rhetorical question. I think they would. Because he is a very soft-spoken guy. And
he's pragmatic, and he's pragmatic too, outside of being loud and, you know what I mean? He's more analyzing the situation and trying to find something to do accordingly and not necessarily yell at a guy. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, and, he's not, Simeone or something. Like, he's not out there to Conte. He's not screaming and running around and making, gesturing on the sideline. And I think that some people want that because they think that's passion. I don't know if yelling can be passion. I'm not going to question Simeone particularly, but I am going to question whether that's universally passion. Sometimes it's just noise, right? So that's something that goes on there. But at any rate, look, the cult of the manager doesn't really matter. And I think when you look at the firing of the coaches, the 2 coaches that have been fired this year, or I suppose both of them mutually agreed to part ways.
They mutually agreed to accept their own resignation by the bosses or something similar to that.
So the two folks who mutually agreed to part ways this year, Owen Quell and Adrian Heath, of course, the record for those 2 teams following those mutually agreeing to parting ways, 1 win, 5 draws, 3 losses. Those are the combined record of the 2 teams following the firing. So it's not like there's been a big bump there, right, Kevin?
No, exactly. It's literally a very average, very, very mid-table, if not bottom-table type of record over the last few games after those managers have been granted. It's been more Houston because it's very recent for Orlando, but it's not. And when you're looking at Orlando now, there's possibilities of a known manager taking over the next few weeks or maybe months. We'll see what happens in the offseason. But Paul Tenorio over the last few days have been talking about very openly about the possibilities of a Jason Kreis, so one of the most known MLS manager right now without a team. So it's interesting what happens in Orlando.
Yeah. Kreis has obviously been the hammer hanging over every manager in MLS's head over the past year because he is well respected. MLS is a league that recycles a lot because they feel there's an exception. It's MLS exceptionalism, right? That they think
it's that base of knowledge that they don't want to be lost. And if somebody already has that base of knowledge of the league, it's easier to put him in a situation where he's a head coach of MLS franchise.
Yeah, and I do think there is something to that. I don't think it's quite as universal as people think. I think Patrick Vieira is showing that this year, that you can be successful from outside this league, but certainly you need to take the time to learn the league if you're going to do that, or at least learn. And I think with Vieira, actually, to be quick aside, I think that he's more successful than Kreis was because of the type of roster that exists at NYCFC with those big names in there, that they needed a guy that could command respect. And I'm sorry, but Frank Lampard, Pirlo, Villa, they're not going to necessarily look at Jason Kreis. They're going to look at this little guy on the sideline, this American, go, who the hell are you? I don't know.
And don't get me started on Lampard. Lampard, the thigh, the magical thigh. How many goals did he score with this thigh this season? I think 3 or 4.
Jeez. Yes. I saw that was with City with the brief time he was with them too. He gets a lot of fluky goals because he gets in the right position. So
yeah, and he always seems that he wants to get away from the ball and it hits him. It's not the other way around. He never hits the ball. The ball hits Lampard.
All right. Anyway, moving aside from that, though, I think that's Vieira's success. Is he can manage those guys better than Kreis could. Kreis is an MLS manager, though. So that begs the question of whether Orlando is the right fit for him. Because Orlando's very similar to NYCFC. They have outside influence, apparently. There's people from above that are trying to put big names in there. He's got to manage guys like Kaká.
Batista.
Yeah, it's. I don't know whether it's the right fit, and that's if you listen to the interviews yesterday from Tenaro, he sort of indicated that as well. That it's
on Extra Time Radio, by the way. On Extra Time Radio yesterday, if you want to listen to it.
Yeah, he was surprised to hear that he was being linked to this. But I also suspect the other side of this is that Orlando, which does have a good amount of cash, they are a fairly well-off team, especially with the attendance success that they've had there. They're probably offering a great deal of money to Kreis. So it's one of those push-pull things. The other thing about Kreis, and we decided to have a little longer segment here, so we'll probably take a break in a minute or so here. But the other thing about Kreis that I wonder is, like, how much of his success at RSL was a product of the stability that was created there over multiple years, and how much of it was a direct result of him? You know what I mean? Like, he might have just been the benefactor of the stability rather than the reason that they stayed stable. And I don't know whether we'll have an answer to that until he gets a second round at another team. The NYCFC situation, I think you can spin off as them being reactionary and them wanting to put their own guy in the air. And obviously that's all part of the City Football Group stuff. And Vieira absolutely is being groomed for a bigger position. I suspect that City Football Group sees Vieira as Manchester City's next manager. Yeah,
but you know how I taken the NYCFC situation with Kreis? I see it the other way. I've seen it's Manchester City. That was maybe the plan all along, but they wanted to take Jason Kreis. That 1 year that he thought he was being groomed for the City Group, maybe the City Group was grooming to MLS and trying to soak all the knowledge possible out of Jason Kreis. And after a year of having him as their coach, like, you know what? I think we learned all we can from him. Let's pass that knowledge to Patrick and let's move on. Maybe that was the plan all along.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe a bit cynical, but I know what you're saying.
No, and I don't pass judgment on it. I'm just saying that maybe if you're looking at a pragmatic situation, you want to learn the league, so you need somebody to begin the team that knows the league, and eventually, like Jesse Marsh, you move on with Montreal, or maybe it's a similar situation.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was well compensated for it. So it all worked out in the end for everyone. And like I said, there's no doubt the City Football Group is grooming Vieira. So obviously bringing him in so Vieira can be successful in Major League Soccer, so he can learn the quirks so that he can just go focus on being a manager rather than focus on managing and learning at the same time, which is pretty much why that derails a lot of guys from outside. At any rate, when it gets to Kreis, though, as I said, I think you can throw the NYCFC stuff aside, but if he goes into a second situation and once again fails, obviously the circumstances have to be looked at individually, but nonetheless, questions start to arise of how much of RSL success was his then and how much was Garth Ludgerway's and how much was Bill Manning's and so on and so forth. Lots of questions in the days ahead there. And certainly I think this is close to a done deal based on reading between the lines, and it's an obvious deal. I don't know who else you bring in if you're Orlando other than to wait the year out and see if Siggy or someone else becomes available.
No, exactly. And last thought on Orlando, it's kind of an awkward situation for Harrison Heath. Hopefully everything works out for him, but he's kind of stuck between two parties right now, and hopefully it all works out for pro players. You never want to see your father was a coach and he's not anymore in a situation when you're playing for that team make you miss any opportunity.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit of transfer stuff that's going on around Major League Soccer.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back. We mentioned the interview on Extra Time Radio yesterday. I do actually recommend that anyone who follows the league and follows some of the ins and outs of it to listen to that interview, because it was quite informative in a lot of ways beyond the the Kreis stuff. Well, what I do want to talk about now is another part that came out and sort of it ties into also some reporting up here from Anthony Tatera about Kyle Larin. For those that don't know who Anthony is, Anthony's a local guy. I know him well. He's out of the Toronto scene. He's well connected, particularly to Italian sources. And obviously here in Toronto, there's a lot of connection between the Italians and the Portuguese sources. So I believe him when he's saying that he's hearing this from Benfica. And he's reported stuff before. And the rumor is that Kyle Larin is being linked to Benfica right now. He has been successful at reporting some of those transfers from that part of the world in the past. So look at this as something a little bit beyond a rumor. And we all know, and we've talked about many times in the show before, Kevin, that
I was going to mention it. That we feel like Larin's going to leave after this season. That was just a launching platform.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to pretend that I've talked to Kyle Larin, thousands of times, but I have talked to him before, and I have talked to his people a bit more than that. And I know that their aspirations are beyond Major League Soccer, and they always have been. They're very calculated too. It's a very smart group of people. I mean, he stayed the extra year in college because they felt that because they looked ahead. A lot of people thought Kyle Larin was going to come out as a Generation Adidas player in 2014. They looked at the situation, the landscape of Major League Soccer. They realized that NYCFC and Orlando City were coming in the following year. They decided to wait because they knew he'd be the first pick overall, and those two teams would have the first picks. They wanted to go to one of those two teams. And the reason they wanted to go to one of those two teams is because the rumors were already pretty hot and heavy that Orlando was going to bring in a big Brazilian star, and they felt that Kyle could learn under him. And everyone knows who's owns NYCFC, and that's a big club too, right?
Exactly.
So
there was a plan laid out. You can tell how it unfolded. There was a plan, laid plan for how the career of Kyle Larin was going to unfold for him to achieve the most amount of potential on not just a money scale, but on a where you're playing, where do you fit in the football landscape in the entire world, where you want to climb. And Benfica is probably not the last stop as well, if it's the next one. I do have a feeling where Kyle Larin's aspirations might be as big as we have seen for a North American player. And well, it's all good. Dreams come true sometimes for people. And if you believe it hard enough, and more importantly, work hard enough and get lucky breaks here and there, you might have a shot at it. Maybe that's what he's going for.
Yeah, look, Benfica, they do sell a lot of young players on. That's a big part of their model.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of people that hear that are saying, well, I don't know. Like, we're reluctant to believe that Kyle Larin could go on and play for a fairly big club. Benfica's not a small club by any means.
Look at his athleticism mixed with technique and tactical awareness. He's learning the last two. He's got the first one. But those are the type of things that a club like Benfica can teach you and help you grow at it and adjust your game to the European level of it and to continue to grow. That's what the academies are known for. They're not known to breed players to breed. They're not known to.
I hope not.
I hope. Well, you never know what can happen with China, Russia lately. If you go to academies like this, they're known to teach club players from the 15 to 17, 18. That's where they groom them. That's a better word. They groom them to be a better player, sell them, make money off of them. That's where they do. They don't take players when they're young. But when they see a player like Larin that's a little older than they're used to, but maybe his upsides is a little higher, we don't know that. We'll see. Maybe there's an opportunity for Benfica to continue to do the same, or maybe just have a guy who can score goals for them in the La Liga. The Portuguese Premier League.
Yeah. I think that they're not going to bring him into Benfica unless he plays for Benfica. I mean, there was some suggestion I read yesterday that they might loan him down somewhere or something like that. He's not going to do that. He's going to go to a club like that to play because he's going to view a club like that as his best chance, his fastest chance to make that second move to, I mean, let's face facts. From Canadian players, you get to Benfica. That's pretty much as high as most Canadian players get. Kyle Larin has aspirations to that next tier.
Yep.
That tier that
Premier League, Liga, upper echelon of that. So I would say a team like Hotspurs and higher, maybe.
Yeah, you're talking about a level that maybe a handful, 3-4 Canadians have ever gotten to. So that's where he wants to get. And a Canadian, that decided to represent Canada, because there was one Canadian that did make it to the very top teams of the world. However, and he's the two of the biggest teams in the world. At any rate, I'd point out that Owen Hargreaves won the Champions League. Well, he still was technically a Canadian. Well, he is still Canadian. You know what I mean? Anyway, he hadn't declared for England at that point. moving beyond him. What I'm getting at is that's Lauren's aspiration. He wants to get to a club like that, or at the very least a club that's just a tier below it, like your West Hams and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's where he ends up, obviously we'd all be thrilled here in Canada for it. Benfica also has an added bonus, and I think this might just be happenstance, but if you think that they're calculated, Benfica is likely within the city of Toronto, which Kyle is from, probably I would say the second, third, fourth most popular team in this city because of the large Portuguese population here. There are just tons of Benfica fans. There's a lot of Sporting fans too, but Benfica is the most popular Portuguese team in this town. So there would be inherent marketing opportunities for him within his own hometown if he were to play for Benfica as well. So that would just be another added of, if you want to believe that they're that calculated, another added thing that they could include in that. So the other part of that, and we'll move on from Kyle after this, but I thought it was interesting. Paul in the interview yesterday said that if Orlando holds on to him, if they sell him now, they will only get 50% of the allocation back because he's a Generation Adidas player by contract. If they wait to the end of the season, they'll get 75% of that contract back in allocation. So that would suggest to me that unless Benfica blows them out of the water with an offer, it's very likely that this is a January target. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think that there's something Kyle benefits from finishing the season in Orlando, even with the turmoil that's going on right now.
Just for accolades' sakes. Just for him to be able to say, look what I did in my first year, look what I did in my second year. You want to be able to do that to prove not just what you can do, but to have on paper results to show somebody, look what I can do, look what I did. And you want to have that completion in your second year as a pro, because if you're looking at a couple of articles that came out, especially on the main line, which is the SB Nation on Orlando, talking about his sophomore slump, because it feels like he's not scoring at the same rate. He's not, but if you're looking at the whole season, he's probably going to start more games than he was last year. With that percentages equaled, he would score 17 goals if he continues to have the same rate as now, which would equal his tally of 2015, which he won the Rookie of the Year. So even though there might be a feeling he's not scoring at the same rate, he isn't. But this prorated over the entire season would equivalent to the same goal tally. And that, in a way, contradicts the sophomore slump and gives you an idea that he's still having a very good season, even though everything is hitting the fan in Orlando right now.
He's got 9 goals. That's pretty good. And what he hasn't had a hat trick game. He had at least one hat trick game last year, if I remember. So if he gets hot in the second half, there's nothing, like, I wouldn't put any money down on this, but I would also not suggest that it's impossible that Kyle Larin could win the Golden Boot if he gets hot in the second half. He's having, he's right there at 9 goals. You get up to, you could say he gets a couple multiple goal games in the next month, and suddenly he's sitting at 13, 14 heading into September. All bets are off then. He could have a monster year. So certainly I think there's a lot to say. And even if he only ends, let's say he gets 13 this year, that's still not really a slump. That's a pretty damn good return for a kid that's still pretty young.
No, exactly, Duane. So there's no sophomore slump right now for Kyle Larin. And hey, that's the one thing you predicted is, like, I don't like the term sophomore slump. I don't even want to talk about it. I'll do my talking on the field. And so far, maybe the optics are not as him scoring as much, but guess what? He kind of is.
All right. Moving in Portland, they moved out their starting keeper, won the MLS Cup last year. Gleason, the New Zealand, right? Yeah. The New Zealand international. He is going to be their number one the rest of the way. A guy that's kind of been in that system for a while. It's been in the United States, came through the U.S. system. There was interesting, you could go back, not to throw to another show constantly, but to go back to the Extra Time Radio from yesterday, they sort of had this brief discussion about whether or not it's foolhardy to go outside of North America to bring your keepers in. And it's not necessarily something I disagree with. There are a ton of keepers that are just sitting rotting in North America. And I think that if you give some of these younger guys a chance, and obviously Alex Bono is getting his chance right now, and we saw what happened on the weekend, but we'll leave that well enough alone. I can't really leave it well enough alone. I'm obviously dwelling on it still. However, there's another young kid that might deserve a chance. Q this weekend. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, it's an interesting thought exercise, and it is an area, particularly the United States. Although Canada's had a history of good keepers too. It's in recent years they struggled a bit, but certainly you look at your Paul Dolans and your Craig Forrests and all those guys that have played at a pretty high level that have done pretty well for themselves. Pat Onstad as well. in MLS circles. So there's a good history of North American keepers doing well in this league, and I think that it's probably an area where they probably should be looking at not looking internationally to bring those guys in. That's my thought anyway, Kevin.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting situation. And again, we go with the argument, is it the position in a cap league where you need to spend the most amount of your cap hit? That's always a question. If it is it the value, is it there? We've seen Tim Howard save goals and maybe already bring 3 points to Colorado. So maybe I'm eating crow. Maybe it is worth it. We'll see, but it's an interesting position.
Yeah, Dave Clark would argue too with Seattle when they brought Keller in when they first started, and him and I back then. It's going way back now, these conversations, but we used to argue at the time whether it was a good move for them. And I know that Dave put some stats out at the time that showed that Keller probably was worth a max DP type contract back then. I'd have to go back and look at that, but certainly interesting stuff. I still am reluctant to think that it's the best place to spend your money. I think that you can make do. Well, we saw with Konopka at TFC last year. I felt, and I'm still a little bit pissed that they didn't bring Konopka back. I thought that he was a perfectly adequate keeper for a very low amount on the cap, and I think that that's kind of your value. You can find it there. Final thought on the transfer, then we'll take a break and have a little conversation about the Premier League, I think. The final conversation here, actually, we'll talk about the NASL first. Anyway, moving on. I want to talk Simeon Jackson real quickly, Canadian international. That sort of he did this meteoric rise to the Premier League, and he's kind of having not quite as meteoric, but a slow sort of downhill. It's like a roller coaster ride, Simeon Jackson's career, but he has landed with another contract in League One with Walsall. Good for him, I guess. I kind of like to see Simeon come back here. I think it might be better off for him to come back here at this point, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. As long as he's playing at a highest level, that's the best we could want. But yeah, it would be fun to see him playing in our neck of the woods, though.
Yeah, very much has. Paul Pescasolido or Ian Hume would be the guy that I would compare him with. They're both all forwards, obviously. Pescasolido is going way back now, which makes me old when I say that. But Pescasolido sort of bantied around closer to the championship level. He ended up in League One at the end, had a lot of goal scoring and success there. So you can make a good career over there. You can absolutely have a nice little life playing in those leagues. But if you want to sort of push the envelope on a national team level, I might even argue that Jackson is starting to fall out of that scene. They sort of prefer Hume to come in as that backup striker now behind Larin simply because of his experience.
Not just because of that. How many veterans do you want on the team where you're actually looking forward in the future and trying to give experience to the younger generation? So no, exactly. So on a national team level, if you are closer to home, well, technically you should be more in the conversation, and the awareness of you should be more there. So maybe you're an easier pick. When you're far from the eyes, sometimes, what's the expression? Far the
out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Nonetheless, Simeon it is a good story. He went over, played in the conference. He had a grandmother or a cousin or something over there that he lived with, and fought his way up as an undersized guy that wasn't really fancied, and did play in the Premier League and scored goals in the Premier League. So an awesome story nonetheless, regardless of where it is now. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll do a little bit of NASL talk.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Because of the way we had to shoot the show yesterday, and sometimes we have to pre-record the shows because of just scheduling issues, we weren't really able to talk NASL, so we thought we'd review it now, Kevin. And we'll start, of course, with the Hug It Out Derby.
The Hug It Out Derby. Let me guess, that's Yetis versus Ottawa?
Yeah, 1-0 for the Eddies on the weekend there. Look, Edmonton continues to have it. That was at Clark Field as well. And Steven Sandor has talked lots of time about Edmonton's home advantage. The Fury, I think, they had a little bit of success down the stretch last year when DeYoung was there, but losing him, they're going to work Tissot in, and that's good for them. But it's going to be a bit of a stretch for them. It's going to be a bit of a struggle for them this year. Obviously, they had the run last year, and we'll hope for them. But I think that most Canadian hopes have to be focused on Northern Alberta now, because the Eddies continue to show that they're for real with another win in the, as I now calling it, the Hug It Out Derby. I think I might start a Wikipedia page on that because I like that, the Hug It Out Derby.
Hashtag Hug It Out Derby.
Yeah, no one was really catching on to it yesterday, but that's what I meant. The shocker of the weekend, though, was Rayo 3-0 over the Cosmos.
Yeah.
That's, what are you going to do with that? Other results, Minnesota United 2-0, Miami 1-0 over Jacksonville. Minnesota beat
But the Cosmos, to be fair, both teams played on the Wednesday before that game. They played on July 13th, and the Cosmos won 3-0 over Jacksonville, and Rayo tied 2-2 versus Puerto Rico. So it was in Rayo, so they didn't have to travel to Puerto Rico. But those two teams were two games in like 3 days. So basically, it wasn't necessarily the optimal condition, but Rayo took advantage of their home field, and it was a travel for Cosmos. And it's quite a trek when you think about it, from New York to Oklahoma. In 3 days, you have to do that travel, settle in, play the game. It's not in ASL. It's probably worse for travel. Well, it's not probably. It is worse for travel than the MLS and any other pro league in the entire world.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Steven likes to say the longest road trip in North American professional sports is from Edmonton to Puerto Rico.
Well, in the entire world of pro sports.
Yeah, I suspect it would in terms of a league matchup for sure. It's the equivalent of flying, to China, basically. From
Montreal from Edmonton to Beijing in 17 hours, it was used to say.
Yeah, well, I think you got a direct flight from Toronto for 12. So it goes right over the North Pole and into Beijing. So it would probably be an easier flight. It would be easier to travel to Beijing from Toronto than it would be to travel from Edmonton to Puerto Rico. And that's craziness is what it is. I do think, let's talk about Puerto Rico, and I have a bit before. They fascinate me a bit. When I talked to Steven 2 weeks ago, he sort of indicated that he felt that Puerto Rico's biggest strength obviously would come at home, because teams are going to really be destroyed by the heat down there, destroyed by especially in the next couple months, right? Like it will be hot down there till the end of October. The travel is just going to be really hard for people to deal with. Now, the thing is, Puerto Rico has to deal with that travel all the time itself too. So that's going to be a challenge for them. And I can't help but wonder whether the Caribbean League, if and when it starts, would be the better fit for them. I know that probably their ownership is focused and likes the idea of the Cosmos coming in, just like Edmonton likes the idea of the Cosmos coming in. But sometimes you have to think pragmatically, Kevin.
True, but with a certain part of ownership being Carmelo Anthony, based in the United States and be a player, for him, it's a money venture, and he likes the idea in Puerto Rico, and it's a place he travels and enjoys vacationing at, and found an opportunity to invest in a local project. And local, you know what I mean? So the Puerto Rico team could be maybe the jewel of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico is the shining star of the Caribbean, used to be. It could be that team, and they could have maybe an affiliate in the Caribbean League, but this team could represent the best of Caribbean soccer, playing against the quote-unquote best in North American soccer. So that could be the idea I like about Puerto Rico.
Yeah. All right. Quickly, looking at the stand-ins before we say goodbye on talking about the NASL for this week, and we are continue to look for an NASL nightcap host. Unfortunately, Theo had to take a step away from that for reasons that were completely legitimate. So we do need someone to step up if we want that to continue. Kevin and I talked the other day. I will, if we don't have a host soon, I will find some ways to get some NASL stuff out there under that banner in the days ahead, probably interview onlys, but certainly we'll get some material out there for you. But if you do have interest in that, Kevin, throw that email address real quick out, that how you can contact us if you want to be considered for that.
sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com.
And absolutely, we're looking for, it's a valuable piece of this network, and we really want it to continue. All right. the overall standings right now, the Cosmos, with the disappointment of not winning the fall season, they do, despite that loss on the weekend, they still remain on top of both the combined season and the fall season standings right now, 27 points. Indy 11, 25 points. They already have their playoff spot locked up. They're second. So the real battle here is kind of between Edmonton and Minnesota. Edmonton is in third overall right now with 24 points. So right now they're 4 points into the playoffs. Minnesota at 22, the final playoff spot right now. Rayo, with a great fall season so far. They've gone from the bottom to near the top. They started from the bottom. Now they're here.
I don't have it queued up, unfortunately, but
yeah,
that would have been my cue.
They're in a three-way tie at 20. Carolina's going the opposite direction. They're one of the teams in there. Tampa Bay sort of always been floating around that middle. Fort Lauderdale, the team that doesn't pay its players, they're not really doing so well now that they're not paying their players. Go figure. They do have a big game this week against Chicago, though.
Are those two related? Good question.
Yeah, I imagine those guys are holding on to play the Fire, and once that game's over, I think you might be able to see that go through the roof here. The NASL is really pushing hard the U.S. Open Cup game. And we'll end with that. I mean, I wonder how important it is to the NASL to get to the semifinals if they have any legitimacy here. When you have this controversy around Fort Lauderdale, does it help them? I think that's the question. Does it help them if the team that's not paying their players regularly makes it to the semifinals of the U.S. Open Cup? Does that really help them?
Well, I don't know. It's kind of an unprecedented situation. We'll see, but I just want to reiterate that it's unacceptable in pro sports, especially in North America, to, yes, there are circumstances. There's always these reasons and excuses. It's all well and good. But nothing justifies not paying players or staff, by the way, just not players. It's if all signs, which all signs do support this allegation a few weeks ago, it's unacceptable not to pay your staff and players in our context of pro sports. So this being said, they kind of get what they deserve.
Yes, it's unacceptable to not pay your
How would you feel?
Babysitter, right? Like, I mean,
Exactly.
come on.
I mentioned that last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about it, Duane. How would you feel and how would I feel? I would be majorly annoyed, if not say pissed, if I didn't get my paycheck every 2 weeks. And I think everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, no, you'd be looking for a new job is what you'd be looking for, which is, I suspect is what's
new
happening.
job or the litigation process to get my money.
Yeah, both. You can do both.
Both are not. Yes, exactly. You can do both at the same time.
Yeah, which, obviously I think some people will be on the phones trying to. Well, the problem is too that if Fort Lauderdale refuses to sell these players and they're under contract, they have to through process to get released from their contract. That will happen. There's precedent that they will release players to allow them to move on a free if they're not being paid, but there's a process and you have to sit for a while. And no professional athlete, especially a professional athlete at the level these guys are playing at, wants to or can afford to do that. So it's a problem.
And unfortunately, in our soccer bubble in Canada, Duane, we have seen this situation happen a few times abroad with some Canadian national team player not being paid and actually getting released from the contract for that exact clause in FIFA.
All right, exactly. And one might sign for TFC soon. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll end it with a little Premier League talk. We are going to focus a lot more on the European leagues in the days ahead as they start to ramp up. But we'll start with a little England talk because everyone likes England.
Hey, it's Kevin of the Sports Podcasting Network. On SPN, on top of What's the Score, the Sports News Quiz, you can find a plethora of great sports podcasts. Hardwood Radio, Gridiron Radio, Sports, It's in the Game, Scuderia F1, the second most listened to F1 podcast in the whole world, Soccer Today, live radio shows like Open Lines After Dark, MLS Postgame Show, Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast, Off the Woodworks, and much, much more. All that on the Sports Podcasting Network.com.
What's the most listened to F1 podcast in the world? Because I want to have a battle with them.
I think it's the Sky Sports F1 podcast.
Ooh, so they got some resources.
We can't necessarily compete. Well, our production values, I have to say, are pretty high up there, but we don't necessarily have access to Lewis Hamilton every single week. So
yeah. All right. Well, if you hit that Patreon button, guys,
we might.
What is the Patreon?
Patreon.com. That's Patreon.com/sports podcasting network.
take on those Sky Sport bastards.
They're actually quite nice lads. I actually met them a few weeks ago when they were in Montreal, and we actually had a great conversation. And David Croft, cheers, my man.
All right. I don't follow racing a lot, but I did follow the Molson Indy here, and it's not the Molson Indy anymore, is it? Or is
yeah,
it?
It is.
I mix the sponsorship all the time. The Toronto Indy.
Indy, exactly. Well, I remember the days of the Champ Car, or before that, the IRL, but now it's the IRL still. But I don't know. It's lost a little bit of his luster.
Yeah, I was at a Ligue 1 game at Varsity Stadium on Sunday, and Varsity Stadium, for those who don't geographically, it's about, I'd say, 2 miles. What's that? 3.5 kilometers north of where the race was taking place, and all you could hear is.
Oh yeah, they're quite loud. It's quite a different type of technology that it's used in F1. Let's just say F1. It's now hybrid cars that have like an electric component to them, and there's an actual electric that exists, Formula E, that will be Montreal next year. Cheap plug, and but the Scuderia F1 podcast for more detail.
All right, fair enough. Let's move back to our bread and butter here of this show and talk about soccer. And particularly, I want to talk about England. I realize that I peed off a few people by saying everyone likes England, because I know there's some people out there that like to get their knickers in a knot over the best league in the world stuff. And it isn't the best league in the world, clearly, right now, if you look at results, but it is one of the more entertaining leagues in the world. That's
most followed. How about that? How about the most watched?
Exactly. It is the most watched. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know how you could argue that. I mean, it's so accessible all over the world, and the storylines are so known, and we all understand it. It's understandable to us what these clubs are, because we've grown up with them at this point. And this generation that's just below me have never lived in a country or a culture here in Canada or in the United States and North America as well that hasn't had this as part of their sporting landscape. And that's a new thing in North America. It's kind of interesting to me, because like when I grew up, Kevin, I had to seek it out. You don't have to seek it out anymore. You
had to go to a pub that had that special satellite that could get that European channel, that Eurosport, that you could watch the games there. You had to go to that Italian cafe, that English-Irish pub. That's where you had to go. Now you just open your TV and you have every single English Premier League game in HD. From Crystal Palace versus Southampton to Chelsea versus Manchester United, it is possible to watch every single minute of action in the English Premier League. But this year, Duane, we have the carousel of managers, the maybe Hall of Fame of international manager right now. Best of the best are going to battle each other in maybe what could be very, very interesting sideline season in the Premier League this year.
Yeah, we talked about the cult of the manager off the top when we were talking about Major League Soccer. It's obviously a little less pronounced here in North America, although there is a star system nonetheless. Over there, though, in European soccer, it's insane. Like as a Manchester City, if you don't know this, I don't know what you've been listening to for a while. I don't ever hide it, but
if you're paying attention, you know.
Yeah, as a Manchester City supporter, I do try and objectively look at them, but nonetheless, when I'm watching the games, I ain't objective, and I do have partisan views on that. But I mean, it's been pep, 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 pep. That's all I hear, right? Like I barely register who he's bringing in right now because it's all pep. Every single MCFC.co.uk story seems to be about him. All their Twitter accounts at MCFC are all pep. It's Pepamania. It's Pepperania. And it's the same with the other side of that.
Exactly. It's Oze, okay, Zlatan, but moo.
It's crazy. And we realize that these guys aren't going to be taking free kicks, right? I don't know if we do.
Well, Zlatan will, but not Jose for sure. And you have I already heard yesterday, I was reading, I don't know who said it. I can't remember who said it. It was one of the pundits from England saying that Mourinho could be Sir Alex Ferguson. He hasn't managed one competitive game yet, and he's already being compared to Sir Alex Ferguson. What a blasphemy for Manchester United fans, which I'm not. But if you are, that would probably be that blasphemy. But Mourinho, Pep, Ranieri, who else? It's the carousel of managers. The Conte with Chelsea. It's kind of crazy that this year you'll have all those managers trying to be the best in England.
Yeah, look, I mean, Jose is a guy that comes in and does a short term. He's a visual. What's the word? He's what soldier that you pay? What's
mercenary?
Yeah, thanks. The English guy asking the friend. Yeah, anyway, happens more than we like here. But anyway, mercenary. Like he's a mercenary, right? Like he comes in, and there's nothing wrong with that in the modern game, really. And I think that we all understand that.
Look at the North American sports. It's all what it is. 3-4 years. That's the lifespan of a coach. So it's something that's new to the European landscape, but we have seen for many, many years here.
Yeah, I mean, I am an old school. I mean, I'm not a man. Obviously, I'm not a Manchester United fan. I'm quite the opposite of it. But nonetheless, I'm someone who has followed Manchester United in one way or the other for a long time. And you can make your bitter and blue jokes if you want with that. But certainly, I know a lot about what the history of that club is because I've been exposed to it. That type of manager is, to me, the way to go, though. That type of stability is something that I've always wanted every team that I support, whether it be in soccer, whether it be in North American sports, that I wanted that. And I look back at some of my North American examples, and the biggest success is when they've had long stretches of the same guy. I know a lot of people criticize. Sorry, I'm going to get out of soccer here for a second, but I know a lot of people criticize Cito Gaston when he was a Blue Jays manager. But that stability and that ability to manage the people that were in the room, because he was a bigger than life presence that was something that was large and had a long history with the club, I think was absolutely vital to their championship years in the 90s. And then when he came back, he helped sort of restabilize that team in the market. So a guy like that has been key to that. And when I was a young kid, I was a Dallas Cowboy fan. I still, I guess, technically one, but I don't follow football that much anymore. And Landry, the coach there, Tom Landry, was there for years. And the same deal. Like, that's the type of coach that I want. And I think that's the type of coach that's most successful. But I just don't know whether we'll ever see that again in this sort of hyper must-win now sort of society that exists in sports, Kevin.
Well, it's all related to the pressure of winning, because when you invest that amount of money, you want to win. Now we see United investing more money than we're used to over the last few years, especially this year with the transfer that they've signed. For that reason, they kind of want to get results. So do they set themselves up for, if Marino 2 years down the road doesn't succeed like they want to, and you know what happens when Marino doesn't succeed? It's not just, oh, we're just going to, no, it ends badly. That's how it ends with Marino. There's never any easy breakup with the move. It always is tumultuous. So maybe that's going to happen down the road. You have to already look what you can do. But when you have that amount of investment in your roster, in your team, can you afford to not to win for 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, the time that it's necessary for a manager to raise the type of players he wants to represent his playing views, his style, his instincts of players? Takes seasons to build that. Do today's game have the patience for that? That's a question.
Yeah. To move it back to this year, you mentioned the three managers, and obviously there's been stability at Spurs, which is the fourth, and Arsenal, which has nothing but stability. And maybe that's the counter to my argument about long-term longevity of a manager, right? Is that
and it's not working.
Yeah,
well, depends what your goal is. If your goal is to be talked about and get to the Champions League every year and not necessarily winning anything, maybe Arsenal do have the best blueprint.
Yeah, look, yeah, you can make an argument, and it's certainly, look, the comparison I do with Arsenal, and I'm here, get your bingo cards out, guys. It's going to be a hockey analogy. The analogy I make with Arsenal is the Toronto Maple Leafs in the pre-salary cap years, that they have enough money, a lot of money, they make more money than anyone else, but they're satisfied with this sort of baseline mediocrity, which in Arsenal's case, it has to be in context. I don't think fourth is mediocre, like a mediocre team skill-wise, but within the context of where they play and the amount of money they have, I think it is mediocre. What the hell word is that? Mediocre,
yes, Duane.
Yes, to continue to finish for us and sort of finish their bail in the round of 16. I think that team should aspire to more because of the finances they have involved, but because they seem to be almost financially focused on that. Buying cheap players, never going after the big names, being satisfied with fourth place and getting those Champions League dates and that Champions League money. It does seem almost like it's a commercial entity as much as it is a sporting entity. And that's always how I kind of viewed them and equated them with the Leafs. The Leafs would kill for the amount of success that the Arsenal does have. However, to move it off that's kind of where I go with that. But he has, that said, this is a manager early on in his days, had a perfect season and so on and so forth. Not a perfect season, an undefeated season. Yeah. And lots to go on there. But do you think that the season is, as we near the end of the show, do you think that this season is going to be the revenge of the bullies? That's how I'm determining it, because I don't think Leicester can do it twice. Do you?
It's not because of Leicester. We have to put things back in context. The rise of Leicester can be explained at the same time you have the fall of Chelsea, another team that usually a contender that wasn't. So it's an opponent of Leicester that would have been present that wasn't for the entire season. Are those things going to be replicated? Are the schedule of Leicester wasn't sort that it wasn't necessarily top heavy at the beginning. It was more in the middle and towards the end, and they were able to get the results with the confidence being built with month and month of good results and growing as a team. Will that be replicated? It's going to be different. The schedules are different from year to year. Dates are different. So that all together makes for the factor, like you cannot replicate this fluke that happened last year. It's a fluke. It's a well-deserved fluke. Don't get me wrong, but you cannot replicate it that easily. A couple of transfers were done. Is that going to have impact on the team? Can Ranieri get the best out of his team again once he has different type of opposition? We'll see. Tactically, what they have done is impressive. The other teams will have caught up to that, and look at the crop of managers that are coming in this year. Conte had a great result at the Euro, propelling a team like Italy further than we expected and looking the best they have in a long time. That's under Conte. He's going to bring that attitude to Chelsea. Pep wants to recreate what he has done over the last two clubs he has been in, winning literally every single trophy he can. He wants to do that again. So Mu wants to come to a new club and become a different manager, become what he has always said, an example for him. He wants to be the new Sir Alex Ferguson. So all those things combined makes for a very interesting season.
Yeah. Look, there is the counter argument, and I'll play devil's advocate to wrap the show up because we do like to keep it tight at an hour. The devil's advocate to what you just said, that it was a fluke, and most people think that, Kevin, and I tend to lean that way as well. But the counter argument to it is that the money that exists, especially the TV money that comes in, is going to allow more Leicesters to evolve. Because if you play it smart, especially if the money is getting spread out, it used to be, if you go back 10 years ago, that there really was a big four and they had 95% of the money. There still is kind of a big four or big six even, but they have 75% of the money now, which allows a team like Leicester, which is a very well-off team, actually, if you look at their ownership, but however.
Especially after last year.
Yeah, it allows teams like that to maybe have one-off runs. Whether one single team can sustain it for multiple years, we don't know. But I do think there is a possibility that we will see other maybe miniature versions of that. They might not win the league, but they might get up into a Champions League spot. Yeah. They might be able to do things like that because the money is just more spread out now, which doesn't allow, the more condensed the money is, the more super teams those teams become, right? And that could also be playing a role in England's struggle in the Champions League, is that they don't have the same amount of dominance on any single team. Bayern Munich cannot emerge in England right now because the other teams below it have too much money.
But it comes in circles because we go back to what it generates. It's probably the best league to watch because on almost any given Saturday or Sunday or Monday, depending on the case, any team can win.
All right. We'll have a lot more Premier League coverage in the days ahead. Certainly, we have an Olympic tournament to cover in between. But as we get towards the end, and we are less than a month since the start of the season, good God, then we'll crank that up. All right, Kevin, let's say goodbye for today, and we'll be back tomorrow with some. We'll go the opposite direction. We'll have some USL coverage tomorrow.
Absolutely, tomorrow 11 a.m. on the Sports Podcasting Network. Soccer Today. It's USL Wednesdays, and until then, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.